Hey guys, so material tutorial 101. This is a tutorial which will explain to you how materials work in Cinema 4D. So first, in the viewport, in the viewport, in the interface, you have materials down here. You can double click to make a new one, and go create, and you can go, pick just new material. By default, you'll see the material has these are channels. There's a color channel tick and a specular channel tick. Let's for now untick specular. I'll go through what it does. For now, just work with color. Just delete these and just have this one material left. We can obviously rename it to basic material. Okay, so color, pretty self-explanatory. You have RGB values, red, green, and blue. You can change them, you can mix and match them. I personally don't like this. I prefer using the HSV. This way you have a hue at the top, so you can pick the color. Then you can choose how, saturation, mix it with white. And you can value, mix it with black. Also, the enhanced color table is great because, you can pick more dynamically. I also like to show quick storage, which basically means if I, have a color that I'm using all the time, I can just drag it in here, and there you go. Then whenever I'm at a different color, I just click, and there you go. Every material you have it. Everywhere you have a color picker, it's always there. And here you have SVRGB, which is also good. This is good for if you have a big screen. If you're working on a laptop, probably better to just stick to HSV. I mean, this is color table, not really an option I like at all, but you might need it. So yeah, enhanced color table. Yeah. You can pick where you want the values to go. The only problem is when you make a new material, if you make a new scene, you lose this. So what you have to do is you have to go to Edit, Preferences, and you go into Interface, and you pick they change in every version. Files, Units, there it is. Color choosers, Cinema 4D, what is it? HSV. And now every time you open it, you'll have this stuff. Now, so we, picking a color, blue, pastel blue, and we have our first basic material to explain how the rest of it works. When you have an object in Cinema 4D, you can apply the material by dragging and dropping on the object. In the viewport, you can click this tag and delete it from the object. You can drag it onto the cube in the object manager. There's probably other ways of doing it, but these are the two fastest ones. If you want to replace a material in an object, for example, let's have a red material, we could just drag it on top. The thing is then it still keeps the old tag. You might not want that. So you click on this tag, and either you can delete it, or you can just drag it into the material that it's pulling in. If you have settings here that are already set up, you might want to keep them, like if you have different projections or if you have different tiling options, you can just drag it here, or you can also click and drag it onto the actual little icon, and it'll also replace it while keeping all these settings of the tag, your offset and tiles. And we might cover it here. Yeah, we'll definitely cover these settings here, and you'll see in the future why you want to do that. Okay, so let's go through also, when you make a new material, if you double click here, it'll be white with specular, and it won't be white, it'll be gray. I personally prefer my default material to be 100% white and no specular. And then I go Edit, Set as Default. Yes. Now I make a new material. See, correct settings. Very convenient. Well, at least in my life, because I make a lot of materials. Sometimes if you're making a lot of shiny materials, but if you have a setting like blue and you want to copy it and then adjust it, you can just control drag it, and you can just keep making new materials. Similar thing goes for if you have multiple objects. For example, if you have a sphere, you don't have to apply it through this, like by dragging and dropping it. You can control drag this tag over. If you have, say, a sphere, a cube, and another cube, you can also do this. You can control drag two of them, and they both get applied to that cube in the order. So if this one has an alpha map or something and it's see-through, then See, now you can see through. So yeah, there's a whole, basically control clicking and stuff is really cool. You can copy it and paste it to different places. Okay, so now let's go back to our view, or get rid of this noise here. Go through how to do that now. Now you have a whole bunch of channels here. You have color, luminance, reflection. Most of them you can just right click, you just go to the bottom and go show help, and there will be a help file which will tell you what it does. You can click on them and they have examples and everything, very convenient. I'm just going to try to explain to you, how these work. For example, everything, when you apply a material, you'll always notice they have this thing called texture. And in the color channel, if you add a texture like, say, noise, all it does is it changes the color of it. You'll see it applies it. But in all the other channels, it actually controls the channel's properties. For example, let's add, say, reflection. Now, by default, this sphere is going to be fully reflective, as you can see here. So if I render, it'll be black because there's nothing to reflect. But if we add, say, a floor, render, you can see it's reflecting it. If we add, set a physical sky, and we hit render, you can see it's fully reflective. What we want, though, is we want it to be reflective only in certain areas. So you can do this by applying a texture map, like you can get an image, you can load it in. And how it is the blacks are fully reflective, and the whites are not. No, so the whites are fully reflective and blacks are not. Colors get them mixed up, it depends on what you're doing. So let's add Fresnel. If you scroll down to the bottom, you'll see one called Fresnel. You can't really see it here, but there it's just under color. And now what Fresnel does is it makes the outside fully reflective and the inside absolutely not reflective. That's what Fresnel shader does. You can check it in the color channel. For example, here we go Fresnel. See, that's what it does. It depends what angle you're looking at it, basically. If there's a sharp angle, it's reflective. If it's front on, it's not. And you can also tick physical to make it more accurate. But then you lose a lot of control. So you can pick, what kind of object it is. I prefer to have more control. So anyway, when we hit render, as you can see, not reflective in the front, reflective on the outside. We can right click here, go invert knots, and then when we render, we get the opposite, not reflective on the outside, only reflective here. If you want it to be more obvious, you can bring these two together, and then when you render, see, you have this kind of surface. And keep in mind that this isn't only on spheres. This works, if you say, oops, if you go extrude a bunch of these, and throw this all into a hypernode. So it'll still affect, the angle at which you're. Also, you can open materials by just double-clicking on the little icon here. I don't know what version they started doing this, but I think it was R11 or R12. So now let's drag these back out. Let's invert the knots. Hit render. There you go. It's reflective on the outside, not reflective on the inside. That's what Fresnel does. I generally like to put these values to be realistic, like a 3 and maybe 19, or depends on the object that you're working with. Let's just stick a nice little flame on top here. Oops. Sorry, my shortcuts are different. I'm using a default settings, so you guys can follow along. Let's cast a shadow. Let's add a material, which is luminance. Let's go through luminance. What luminance does is it makes an object just glow. If it's at 100%, this object will be white no matter what. So if we render, you can see the plane is now white, but let's apply it to the sphere just to make it clear, and let's turn off the color. So luminance is basically a solid color. See, by the way, when I dragged it, it applied it to the hypernodes, and since they're on a hierarchy, the material, it gets passed down to all the materials below if the materials below have no materials. If the material below does have a material, it will be applied, that material will be applied first, and this one won't be even considered. So let's take this blue one. Now if you hit render, it'll be just white. And that's what luminance does. It's mostly used when you want to do something with low illumination, or when you want to make something just look flat. You can stick lights and nothing will affect it. It just doesn't care. If you turn on global illumination, for example, let's change it to physical and click global illumination, and we render and we render it. See, it glows, it kind of emits. And if you, for example, blast this to like 600, it'll emit a lot more. So that's what you use luminance for. It's basically a glowing material when you use GI, when you have global illumination turned on. If you don't have global illumination turned on, it doesn't glow, it just gives it a plain color. So, oh, well, here, did you see it goes from 600 to 100? To reset any slider to its default value, you right click on the little 2 arrow thing. So, it doesn't work on these, but it works on some. So, yeah. Where's my little color table? Nope, not my color table. Where's my little quick storage? There we go. Drag this in here. It's very convenient. So, yeah, that's what we have there on the luminance panel. And that's why I applied the luminance material to this plane here. So yeah, the material left here. Let's change the luminance value to white and hit render. And you can see the white plane kind of reflects. Anyway, we get a nice kind of lighting effect. If you don't want the white plane to cast a shadow, there's some body tags, compositing, and untick cast shadows. There you go. Got a nice little reflect, but it doesn't cover it up. Anyway, let's turn off physical render for now, because we don't need it. And let's replace this with a normal sphere again. Sphere. Let's give it our blue material. Okay. Next, I'm going to go over how this white and black thing works further. Let's say we want to use a noise material, and here this is a very useful shader. You can put a little arrow here, and you can pick a whole bunch of different noises. You know, for example, say this one here, and you can see its title here. So if you know the name, you can look at it that way, or you can click the arrow and see the previews. Now what we're going to do is we're going to pull up the low clip and the high clip. And now, if we hit render, you'll see only some parts of it reflective. It's not 100%. So let's put 100%. See only some parts of it reflective. Nifty, right? Now, we're going to click this. We're going to go to copy channel. We're going to go to basic. We're going to go to bump. And we're going to go paste channel. Now you can already see here, you can see the bumps. But if you render it, you have little bumps and they're reflective. The only thing is now they're sticking out. So let's make them stick in. Pretty nifty, right? The insides are reflective, the white and blue thing isn't. If you, for example, decide that you want the insides to not be reflective, but the blue thing is, you can always right click on this and you can change these colors. You can go, this is going to be white and this is going to be black. And now when you render, the whole thing's reflective except those little blue lumps. I mean, those little indents, they're still the old same color. Cool, right? And don't forget, you've got this channel. You can paste it into the color channel. You go paste channel. And now you go, let's make the surface, say, green, and the little holes dark red. Now if you hit render, you see the little dark holes turn green, but this thing's still not red. I mean, sorry, the little holes turned red. Yeah. And this thing's still not green. That's because the reflection is currently 100% where this white thing is. If you want it to be less, you can get this white and drag it down to like 50%. See? Sweet, right? Now, let's say you still want Fresnel on this, but you already have this noise shader in it. So what you do is bring this back up to 100%, click on this little arrow, and click Layer. And it will automatically put what you had into a layer system. So this is like Photoshop. Now you can go Shader, Fresnel, and now it'll go back to just Fresnel, which is not really what you want. What you want is you want to change this to Multiply, and maybe scale it down a bit, scale this down a bit, so it's gray. Now when you render, success. Sweet, right? So yeah, that's kind of, see, not reflective here at all, reflective on the outsides. Scale it, mix them, kind of like Photoshop. So yeah, that's our little shader tricks with this. Now, and as you can copy these channels, and you can also feed these channels into each other. But that's more of a, do the expressive tutorial and you'll see what I mean. Cover that you can control colors and stuff. Anyway, let's keep on going down the list. See what else we have that's important. You'll notice you have these two things called transparency and alpha. And they both seem to do the same thing. They make things transparent. And you can see through them. Example, if I go transparency, and I go surfaces, say checkerboard, and I hit render, see, it goes away. If I untick transparency, I go alpha, and I go surfaces, and I go checkerboard, and I hit render. Well, it's inverse, but that's because here it's not inverted, but you generally get pretty much the same effect. However, the difference is, if I apply this red material to the sphere I put underneath, and now I hit render, you can see the red material. But in this green material, if I untick alpha, tick transparency, and I hit render, see, it makes the object transparent. It's like the transparency is like a quality of the object. You're gonna make it's gonna make the object transparent completely, like all the way through. Whereas alpha basically controls whether you can see the texture map or not, and if it's on, you reveal the material that's underneath it. I hope that makes sense. Also in transparency, you can control things like, refraction. So you can, for example, change the refraction to like 1.19. And now as you can see, it becomes like a glass solid thing. Whereas in alpha channel, you don't have that option. Also, you can change stuff like absorption color, make it red, render it. So yeah, all kinds of useful things. And also stuff like refractions on the ground, caustics, they don't work with alpha, obviously, they only work with transparency. So there you go, that's an important point. Let's turn off these transparencies and reflections and dump for a second. And color, let's just make it 0 so it's back to blue. Specular. This is a fun little thing. This is basically like a fake blurry reflection. When you render, you have this white highlight. Let's make it a bit higher so you can see it better. And also you can see if I, for example, add a target spotlight. Let's turn off the physical sky for a second. Let's move around. See, what Specular does is it gives you this little circle here, which is basically a fake reflection. It just blurs it all out. And you can change it. For example, you can make it less high, less pronounced, more pronounced. You can give it some inner width. For example, I usually use it when I want to make something glossy. See, like this. And then, you have a nice glossy kind of surface without really going into blurry reflections. Because if you make reflections blurry, it takes a lot longer to render. So sometimes specular is much nicer. But you have to be careful with it because it often makes things look really fake 3D, as you can see here. So you only take the height down a bit, maybe, it looks better. But yeah, specular is something to be careful with. I, by default, usually have it off, unless I just turn it on when I need it, That's probably why it makes it look so fake, because it's on by default and everyone just leaves it. So, that's why I turn it off by default and I turn it on when I actually need it. Now, normal maps, that's a gaming technique. Oh yeah, that's right. Before we talk about that, let's talk about bump maps and displacement. Let's go to our bump channel. I also notice how here, if I click the bump channel, I can't see it here, but if I double click on the material, I can still go through my channels that are disabled. And I can copy this channel, go to displacement, specular, displacement, and paste. And if you see this, nothing happens here, nothing happens there. If you click render, you get nowhere. That's because there's none of divisions. Let's turn on subpolygon displacement and hit render. Let's turn on displacement. Turn this off for a second. And see if I hit render, but it looks like kind of crappy. So we have to turn on subpolygon displacement, and we have to hit render. And then it looks much nicer. See the difference between this and bumps? Is that this actually deforms geometry, whereas bump maps just make it look like you have deformed geometry. So let's take this back to like minus 20%. So we're the same as the bump map, and we'll hit render. As you can see, we get the same little lumps as you get on the bump map. But these are actually real geometry displacements. Like the bump map, look, if we turn this off, we turn on the bump map, and we turn it to like 83%. It doesn't go far, and if you look on the outside, it's still completely perfectly flat. So this bump map only really affects when you can't see the edge of an object, whereas a displacement map does. It actually affects the outside of an object. Like it affects the geometry of an object. So you actually, like this is, real geometry when you render. So yeah, this subpolygon displacement basically what it does is subdivide the sphere or the object that is on. You can also achieve the same thing by applying this to the top of the hypernodes, and in hypernodes, switch both of these to 4, and you should get pretty much the same results, or not. I don't know, experiment with it. It's too technical for me. So yeah, good. Subpolygon, turn it on, render. It's a really cool way to experiment, and it's fun. You can select stuff like this, and you can increase it to 71 centimeters and render, and you get stuff like this, which is always entertaining. Keep in mind though, don't use this with dynamics or anything because that'll lag everything seriously. You can, but it's because it's actually generating real geometry. Maybe use a proxy sphere for calculating dynamics, and if you use soft bodies or something. So yeah, okay, let's go back to our little list of stuff here. This was subpolygon displacement, where I was sticking it in case you didn't see it. It was off screen. Sorry about that. So yeah, let's keep going through this. Normal maps. They are kind of like bump maps, like in between bump maps and displacement. They're better than bump maps, but they're harder to generate because they're not black and white. They use like 3 different colors. Anyway, beyond the scope of this tutorial, not really a beginner technique. Environment. This is like fake reflections. If you have an HDR map, you can load it in here, and your object won't reflect anything else, but it will reflect this environment. Also a really old gaming technique. Honestly, if you have any kind of semi-decent computer, you should not be using this because, well, it's kind of redundant, in my opinion. But yeah, I think that covers all of them. Diffusion, it's like a second color channel. It kind of affects the strength of the color. Yeah, I don't really use it at all. I feel fine without it. Sometimes people say stick ambient occlusion in here. Ambient occlusion is something very useful you should know about. It basically is like a fake global illumination. No, it's not fake global illumination. It basically it makes the color darker. So let's stick this to show you better than discussing it. Effects, ambient occlusion. And as you can see, it goes from black to white. So now if we hit render, you can't see anything. Let's get a cube. Hit render. Still can't see anything because this is 0. Let's render. Change that to 60%, and let's apply this material to the cube as well. There you go. We have this darkness around here. We turn this off, and we set to white. We render. You see there's no darkness. Whereas with, you can see this little dark kind of shade around it. So basically what it does when geometry is close to each other, intersects, it makes it darker. And you can, for example, make this, there's all these settings here. Let's change this like 150. Let's make this to red, dark red. And now when you hit render, you can see a little red coming through. Let's increase the minimum samples to like 60. maximum ray length, I don't know. Usually getting this sort of red tint there. It's a useful little feature. Study how it works. You have the help menu. It's all very self-explanatory what all the settings do. And you can, don't forget, you can use this in any of the other channels. You can use ambient, occlusion, and reflection. You can make things more reflective as you get closer to other objects. You can use it in transparency. So, for example, if you have something passing through a transparent window or glass or some force field, you can make the color of it change when an object passes through it and where it passes through it. Yeah, you can make a displacement, ambient occlusion. You can make things displace when other things come close to them. Also, we can use it as a mask for a color change. It's all combined. You can use the in the layer channel. So I'll just get back to my green material. There you go. In the layer, damn it, this layer channel. Oh, sorry, it was in reflection. Yeah, it's like Photoshop. You can there's all the modes, and you can use it as a layer mask. So you can have one material, blue, you can use it as a layer mask, and then on top you can use shader, color, and make it blue. And now see there, you use that Fresnel as a So go crazy. And obviously, whenever I load like a noise channel, you can load actual materials into it, which is hopefully what I'm going to do in my next tutorial. I'll show you how to make a planet Earth by loading in materials and controlling the color of the oceans and the land around them and whatnot. Yeah, I think that's pretty much all the important ones. Anything that's like glow, it's a really tacky effect. If you want to add glow, I really suggest adding it, in post, because that's really not a great effect at all. Maybe play with the settings, but I don't know, add it in After Effects. So yeah, that pretty much covers materials, I think. So yeah, I hope you enjoyed this tutorial. Yeah, cheers.